A very great pleasure to welcome up Tina Porou. Tina is Ngāti Porou and Ngāti Tuwharatora descent, and recently founded Poipoia, a company committed to providing environmental services to iwi, local and central government and corporates, etc. Now, Tina is a geographer by training and has worked in natural resources management for the past 20 years. And most recently, she's been head of sustainability at Contact Energy. So a very warm welcome to Tina, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Tēnā koutou, he mihi atu kia koutou katoa. Firstly, I wanted to acknowledge and say thank you to Ngāti Oneone for hosting us today, and to our whānau from Ngāti Oneone for their beautiful welcome today. So he mihi kia koutou. It's a little bit awkward talking about these issues here because I don't even live in Tairāwhiti, but I can say I went to Kaiti school. Okay, Kaiti school. So my background has been in environmental planning, but I am a child of Tairāwhiti, raised under the maunga of Pihanga and my mother's whānau, but I come from Ngāti Porou. My dad is from Te Horo, and he's also from Keke and Wharepunga. I come from Ngāti Tuwharetoa, so my mum is from Ngāti Turangi Tukua. I also come from Ngāti Kahungunu, so Rongo Mai Wahine and Ngāti Rā Kaipāka, and I'm Ngai Tā Manuhiri through my grandfather. The proname is actually from Ngai Tā Manuhiri, but I take all the blessings that come with a name like Porou. And so those kind of experiences have been really helpful in understanding what a circular economy actually is. I guess the key thing today is to set the scene about the circular economy and what that actually means for our whānau at home. And again, I have been really blessed to have been involved in a lot of projects here on the East Coast, but I have to acknowledge all the whānau that do it every single day in our hapu, in our marae, in our whānau, in our kura, who are living what you call a circular economy and what we call kaitiakitanga. And so acknowledging my cousins and my uncles and my aunties who do that work, and particularly because, and if I take a quote from Tina Ngata, you cannot be a kaitiaki from a distance. So you can talk about it, but unless you're doing the mahi, you aren't a kaitiaki. So a circular economy discussion for Tairāwhiti is a really interesting one, given that I've worked in sustainability in large corporates, and I worked for Contact Energy, and for the first year I was trying to figure out what sustainability was. I was trying to be what sustainability books told me I should be, and then kind of about 6 months in I thought, you want me to be tangata whenua? Because I already know how to do that. And so I think one of the challenges for the discussions around circular economy, particularly in Aotearoa, is recognising that the exemplars of a circular economy have been operating in this district for thousands of years. And so the idea that you go to a Western framework to deliver Indigenous models when the key to those are already in our own communities in the Tairāwhiti iwi, I think that's a really important lesson to learn, and I wanted to make sure that we set the scene really clearly, that the circular economy is a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of what kaitiakitanga is as a whole. And so we have to be really careful that we don't package up Indigenous models and then sell it back to us, because that can be sometimes patronising. And I found that very difficult in my roles to kind of wrap my head around that, because I had been brought up by whānau who in their own everyday decisions were living what you now call a circular economy. So I think today what I wanted to make sure was the discussion was around kaitiakitanga rather than a circular economy, because kaitiakitanga to me is a perfect concept. And I spoke recently to the Primary Sector Council about them wanting to use the word kaitiaki in their new vision towards improving the primary sector's impact on our environment. And I think one of the key things around that is it's important to figure out what New Zealand's relationship with the environment is, and not taking what the Māori relationship with the environment is. Because we can have an integrated story, and we can have two different stories that become one, But I think what I've seen more and more is this real kind of connection that non-Māori New Zealanders are finding with kaitiakitanga, but there's also a thin line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. And some people will say, well, why is that important? The environment is dying, you know, we just need to get on with it. Why do we have to reset ourselves? I think the key answer to that is that the Indigenous communities of Aotearoa didn't create the problems that we're currently facing. We weren't around the council tables when these decisions were being made around allocation for water, for resources, and certainly in my experience, our iwi and our hapu have been fighting really hard to get a voice around those tables to reduce the impacts of things that are happening. And it's a real honour to be here with Rod Oram. I've heard you speak in the past, and I think one of the key things is to be careful with the word we. Because we talk about we did this to the environment, and we have to find these solutions, but to be honest, that wasn't us. And so when you make us invisible in that conversation, it again puts the place of mātauranga Māori in a separate space. And what we're trying to do is say, we already have these answers in our own communities. We've been living them. I'm involved in trust and corporations, not only here in Ngāti Porou and in Ngāi Tāmanuhiri, but also in my mother's communities. And we are constantly making multi-level, multidisciplinary decisions on our businesses based on kaitiakitanga every day. We don't need a circular economy framework to convince us that it's important. We're there. We've been there for a long time. And so the opportunity, I think, is for us to look at those exemplars in tangata whenua and then build what the Tairāwhiti economy needs to look like on those. Because I think if you're dealing with a group who are already sold, and I'm probably preaching to the converted today too, you know, we're already at the point where we know that there's a massive environmental disaster coming, but the decisions that are being made around Māori, trust and corporations mainly, but also post-settlement entities, are holistic in nature. They're balancing all of these issues together as one, and they're dealing with them in a complex way that's delivering not only on economic outcomes, but on well-being outcomes for our whānau. And I think when I look at the Activate Tairawhiti vision, I think probably having the word economic in there is probably not the right vision. And there's an opportunity to be able to redefine that. If we're talking about the circular economy, then the first place to start is changing your vision to reflect that. And I think as more and more trust and corporations, Māori trust and corporations, are realising that following capitalism 2.0 to gain benefits and dividends for our whānau, that is failing, and they're reverting back to those constants that we've had in tikanga and kawa, and we're starting to measure across multiple indicators for success. Having good balance sheets these days is not enough to create transformational change. And we're becoming mini governments, so we're having to deal with these matters across all of these dimensions at once. And I think one of the key things about that sense of responsibility comes from whakapapa, the perfect and ultimate circular economy. So whakapapa written on the walls here today, that's kind of the benchmark and the plan for these types of discussions that we've now inherited in our own governance boards, making economic and wellbeing decisions for our whānau. I just wanted to note too that these trusts and corporations have recognised that in the past they may not have always adhered to our own tikanga and kawa. We own that. We own that we might have gotten caught up in this capitalist model, but that we are coming back. And I'm working with large Māori trust and corporations now to help them consider what does compliance look like and what does kaitiakitanga look like, and what is the cost to achieve kaitiakitanga instead of compliance. So we all know that if you comply with the Resource Management Act, you will be failing because it doesn't work. And we know that. And it really is just a plaster to give effect to some of the rhetoric that's going around at the moment. So if compliance is not working, then how can Māori trust and corporations grow across that spectrum to kaitiakitanga? And what is that going to look like for our shareholders? What is that going to look like for our taiao? And what is that going to look like for the future of employment for our people? So we're taking responsibility for that. And I think, again, those exemplars for non-Māori communities are really invisible in this discussion around sustainability and discussion around the circular economy. And I know that because I worked for one of the largest companies in the country as the head of sustainability, and I was the only Māori. I was the only one talking about these concepts, and it floored me to think that the largest companies in this country who are looking for sustainability options will go to companies like Unilever instead of going to companies like Pākehīroa. And that really is, I think, a reflection of the systematic and institutionalised view of Māori organisations and Māori knowledge and Māori thinking in our communities. And I think that's what, if you want transformational change around a circular economy, then open the door and have a treaty partnership discussion. So the taiao is not merely the environment, and I think too, the importance of mātauranga Māori in this discussion cannot be underestimated. The relationship between people and the natural environment has been set out in our waiata, has been set out in our pūrākau for generations, and if we adhere to those rules and regulations, then we know that we can align ourselves and our journey in a way that's sustainable across multiple levers. So I wanted to speak quickly about how that's physically implemented. So te mana o te wai is a concept that is called different things by different iwi. And so everybody has their own kind of understanding of this deep relationship to fresh water. And I don't want to focus just on water as a single entity. This is about climate change. This is about whenua equality. This is about the whole 9 yards is connected. So it's a holistic conversation. And though I'm focusing on water, it's connected to every other piece of taiao that we have. So te mana o te wai is all-encompassing, and this is a principled framework that was really developed about 5,000 years ago, but returned out in a way that was, I think, helpful for many iwi at the time, dealing with the rights and interests conversation that was happening with the government. So the Iwi Chairs Forum, which is made up of 74 tribes, came together and said, we need to come up with something that is universal amongst Māori. That little nugget, because that's easy, right? Because I can't even go to my marae meeting on Sunday, the first Sunday of every month, and get us to agree on what plates we're buying. But I think one of the key things about te mana o te wai was its universal feel. So the words may be different in different hapu, the way in which it's described may be different in different iwi, but fundamental to te mana o te wai was this three-component principle. And when we first talked about te mana o te wai, it was in a circle, because we love curves. And we don't usually do straight lines very often, unless it's in a tukutuku panel, but usually to depict a shape that's holistic. But in about 2018, 17, we went around the country and talked to whānau, and they were so desperately worried about the state of water that they said it had to be hierarchical. It had to be something had to come first, something had to come second, something had to come third, which is very unusual for our people to talk about. But when it came to water, they said really clearly, the first part of te mana o te wai is the first right of water to water goes to the water, not to people. And to take ourselves out of that relationship for a moment and just understand that the water needed its own mana, it needed its own mauri, and it needed its ability to sustain itself and those natural taonga that reside in that way. And so that was a fundamental shift in what we'd been talking about, because we had kind of said, as long as you look after water, then you can do this, and then you can balance this, and everything's going to be honky-dory. But I heard stories from right around the country of whānau saying it is desperate. We can no longer eat from our way. We can no longer gather food from our way. And to be honest, we are not the ones creating the problem, and yet these problems are so externalised that we are taking the blame and the hit for that. And so are ratepayers. So all of these issues were being externalised, their effects, which goes straight to what a circular economy needs to fix. So the second part of Te Mana o Te Wai, once the first right of water is maintained, is a koha. And so Hannah Rainforth, I always quote her because we argued over this, and this is why it's great to have great kaitiaki around the table. She talked about the second part of Te Mana o Te Wai in relation to a nursing mother. She said, when awa is like a nursing mother, she needs enough sustenance to maintain herself, but when she has that sustenance, she gives a koha of herself to her child. But that is after she's got enough. And so that koha is, for us, sustainable use of the wai after the first right of water to water. The third part of Te Mana o Te Wai is fixing the stuff that's broken. And so that's a real restoration focus. Now, this goes right in the face of the RMA. How the RMA works is, how much can we strip from the water before it dies? And that is, and people can argue with me on that one, but I know that's the way it works. We may talk about it working a different way, but every consent application on water is how much can we take out before someone notices, and our social licence to operate is destroyed. And we may tidy it up with a few mitigation agreements that, invest in some environmental restoration, but fundamentally that is how the current Resource Management Act system works. And what's worse is that it's not even written in the Resource Management Act. First right, first in, first serve is not written into the RMA. It was chosen by councils to be used. So what we've been really pushing towards is a Te Mana o Te Wai framework for all allocation for quantity and quantity of wai, quality and quantity of wai. Now this has been really difficult. And Te Mana o Te Wai, the concept, is already in the National Policy Statement for Fresh Water, and it's been in there for a few years. And one of the reasons it wasn't implemented is because council staff were saying, we don't understand it, we don't get it. Which is why I did this pretty picture. Because I thought, man, this is universal. It doesn't matter if you're green, blue, orange or yellow, this makes sense. And again, I'm probably preaching to the converted. But underlying that is ngā matapono ki te wai. And this is a further framework that describes the relationship that iwi and hapu are seeking. Now, when I took this around the country, Te Mana o Te Wai, ngā matapono was already in existence. To re-sense check if this was right, hapu were like, my question always was, do you have a violent reaction to this? And everyone kind of said, look, it's about right. We have geographical catchment differences that aren't reflected in here, but we can add that. That's just us. So ngā matapono was around what are the key changes needed in the current system so that tangata whenua would feel that they had control and were able to achieve Te Mana o Te Wai. So the first one is governance and decision making. And this is really important because you have to actually be around the table. And for us in Ngāti Porou, we have a joint management agreement with the Gisborne District Council, still really early days, but what it enables is a discussion around decision making, not advisory boards, not statutory committees, not all the stuff on the side that councils often give us to give effect to a treaty partnership without actually giving effect to a treaty partnership. And I think that's the challenge where everyone's at. The councils often say, well, we're not the Crown. You are the Crown. You are the Crown. And the reason we know you're the Crown is because you get to make decisions on our taonga. So we know you're the Crown. And so we're seeking leadership from councils. And this is why this conference is so important, because you're all in roles where you can enable this conversation, is that acknowledge you are a treaty partner, and let's just move on. Let's just create something new that comes from a really, a really deep part of who we are as a country. So limit setting is the second part of ngā matapono. So we don't want to be consulted on limit setting, we want to write the limits. We want to make sure that allocation is fair, and that means we want to have access to water just the same as everybody else does, and only though if the first right of water goes to water. The last stage is transition, because we know, particularly in this rohe, massively over-allocated, people are going to be a bit titchy about losing their way. So we need a transition framework to be able to have those conversations openly and to be fair about how water is allocated. So I think I am time up almost. So I think one of the key things, as I've said, is don't be afraid of te tiriti. To be honest, we didn't even write it. And it's funny because everyone goes, oh, it's a Māori thing. Man, we didn't write it. But we certainly understand what the opportunity is for a te tiriti partnership. And so we have to get past the space when we're uncomfortable about that. We have to get past the space where we're defending why we shouldn't have a treaty partnership, and just acknowledge that a treaty partnership is a positive space from which to make environmental solutions that affect everybody. And it brings in all of the opportunities and discussions that having a bulk of amazing mātauranga Māori science that has been in this country 1,000 years longer than anyone else, and then giving the full effect to that, rather than ticking a box and saying, have we got mātauranga Māori? Oh yeah, we invited someone to come and talk about that, but then not giving effect to any of that in your research projects, and having a very small budget to give effect to that when it comes to engaging with our people. So I guess the crux of it was I wanted to set the scene. Nothing about us without us. If you are having a conversation about what Tairāwhiti looks like in the future, then it has to be 50-50. People often ask me, what does that look like though practically? Every committee should be 50-50. I have the experience of being the Māori on lots of advisory groups, and people ask me to come and talk to things, but fundamentally I'm always outvoted, even though I am quite loud and quite opinionated. But if I don't have the numbers, I am just a token. And so if you really want to give effect to this, every committee you have, and resource it, don't ask us to come for free. Because we are qualified technicians in this space. And I think too, one of the key points to note as well is we're busy. So you've got to find a way that aligns with the busyness that we're doing, because we're working full time, we're being kaitiaki on the ground, and we're trying to contribute to these bigger discussions, when often the people who are trying to get the circular economy or even Activate Tairawhiti are actually paid. So we have to acknowledge and give effect to that real important technical skill, rather than expecting it to be for free. So I feel like I might have dropped the microphone today, but I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to have a really open conversation before we start talking about these kaupapa. Because the program looks amazing, but sometimes, and that's why I want to acknowledge Activate Tairawhiti, sometimes we only ask to do the karakia. And then the rest of the conference we're kind of, a little bit invisible. That is not the case today. So I wanted to set the scene and say thank you for that opportunity, and to have this running around in your mind. Whenever you make a decision on anything, how does that affect my treaty partner? Is my treaty partner here in this conversation, in this decision, and is my treaty partner here to implement what I've decided? And so I wanted to set that scene for you all to consider today. So kia ora koutou.